Her name is Ming. She is 12 years old. She is standing in the courtyard of her family home for the last time. Her mother is fixing her hair. Not because there is anything wrong with it, because her mother needs something to do with her hands. Because if her hands are busy, she does not have to say goodbye. An official carriage is waiting at the gate. Ming does not understand yet what the carriage means. She thinks she is going somewhere. She does not understand that she is leaving everywhere. Because inside the walls of China's Imperial Palace, the Forbidden City, there was a world that the outside world was never supposed to see. A world of silk and silence and total control. And the truth of what happened inside it is darker than any story China's emperors ever allowed to be written down. Everyone has heard the word concubine. Most people picture something from a film. Luxury, silk, lanterns reflected in still water. A life of pampered elegance inside palace walls. That image is not entirely false. And that is exactly what makes it so dangerous, because the reality underneath that image, the daily life of the women inside China's imperial concubine system, was something the emperors worked very hard to keep. The world from understanding, the system ran for over 2,000 years, across the Han, Tang, Song, Ming, and Qing dynasties. Historians estimate that at its peak, the Imperial Palace held between 2,000 and 10,000 women simultaneously. Not guests, not employees, women who had entered the palace and could not leave. Most of them for the rest of their lives. This is Ming's story. And through it, the true story of a system that consumed millions of women across 20 centuries of Chinese history. China, Tang Dynasty, 7th century AD. The Tang is considered by many historians to be the golden age of Chinese civilization. Poetry, painting, silk, medicine, mathematics. Chang'an, the Tang capital, was the largest city on earth. Over 1 million people. The Silk Road connected China to Persia, Arabia, and Rome, and at the center of all of it, the Imperial Palace, a complex of buildings, gardens, and courtyards so vast that walking from one end to the other took the better part of a day. Inside it, the emperor, his family, his ministers, his armies of servants and officials, and his women. The imperial concubine system had a formal structure, document, hierarchical, precise. At the very top, the empress, one woman, the emperor's official wife. Below her, a ranked system of consorts, concubines, and attendants, each rank with its own title, its own living quarters, its own allowance of food and silk, its own rules about when and how she could see the emperor. The system was not informal. It was administered like a government department, because in a sense, it was, and Ming was about to become part of it. Every 3 years, the imperial court conducted what was called a selection. Officials traveled to provinces across the empire searching for girls between the ages of 11 and 17 who met specific requirements. Clear skin, good height, straight teeth, no visible scars or birthmarks, no history of illness in the family, correct bone structure. Girls who passed the initial inspection were sent to Beijing for a second examination. The second examination was more thorough. Officials checked everything: the shape of the ears, the sound of the voice, the way a girl walked across a room, whether her hands trembled. Those who passed the second examination entered the palace. Those who did not went home. And here is something that most people find surprising. Many families considered selection an honor. The empire was vast. Famines were common. Life outside the palace for an ordinary farming family was genuinely brutal. If your daughter was selected, your family received payments. Your social status improved. Your sons had better prospects. So when the selection officials arrived in Ming's village in Henan province, her father did not resist. He presented Ming. He believed he was giving her a better life. And now I need you to sit with that for a moment, because the road to 2,000 years of this system was not paved with monsters. It was paved with fathers who loved their daughters and genuinely believed They were making the best choice available. What would you have done in his position? Leave your answer in the comments, because that question has no clean answer, and the people who faced it were not different from us. They were simply inside a world that gave them different options. Ming arrived at the palace gates on a morning in early autumn. She was 12 years old. She had never been more than 20 miles from her village. The scale of what she was walking into was impossible for her to process. The walls alone were higher than anything she had ever seen built by human hands. The first thing that happened inside the gate was registration. Her name was recorded in a ledger, her age, her province, her father's name. And from that moment, she belonged to the palace, not to her family, not to herself, to the institution. The second thing that happened was training. New arrivals were assigned to senior palace women who taught them everything the palace required. How to walk, a specific, measured pace. That conveyed composure without suggesting independence. How to speak, when to speak, how much to speak, and crucially, what never to speak about. How to kneel, how to arrange flowers, how to serve tea, how to enter a room without being noticed and leave without being remembered. How to make yourself useful enough to survive, but never so remarkable that you became a threat to the women above you in the hierarchy. This was the essential skill of palace life. Survival required invisibility, but invisibility meant the emperor never noticed you, and if the emperor never noticed you, your position never improved. And if your position never improved, you would spend the rest of your life exactly where you started. It was a trap built into the architecture of the place itself. The formal ranking system of the Tang imperial harem had 9 levels. At the top, the empress. She managed the entire inner court. She had her own staff, her own finances, her own political influence. Below her, 4 consorts of the first rank, then 9 consorts of the second rank, then a third rank, a fourth, a fifth, and at the very bottom, thousands of ordinary palace women, attendants, servants, girls like Ming, who might spend their entire lives in the palace without ever being in the same room as the emperor. Not because the system forgot them, because the system had more women than any emperor could ever see. Historical records from the Tang dynasty document the numbers with the same precision used to record grain inventories. Emperor Xuanzong, who ruled from 712 to 756 AD, is documented as having over 40,000 women in his palace complex at one period. 40,000. The majority of them spent their entire palace lives waiting for a summons that never came, waiting in a system that had selected them for one purpose and then never used them for that purpose, because there were simply too many, and the emperor was only one man. Subscribe to Ancient Mindcast right now if this is the kind of hidden history you are here for. Every week we uncover what empires tried to bury. Hit subscribe. It costs nothing, and it keeps this channel alive. The cruelest dimension of the system was not cruelty, it was waiting. Palace women who were never summoned by the emperor could not leave. They could not marry anyone else. They could not return to their families, because they were technically, officially, the emperor's women. Even the ones he had never seen. Even the ones whose names he had never read. Even the ones who had entered the palace at 12 years old and would die inside its walls at 70, having spent their entire lives as attendants in a corner of the complex the emperor never visited. They were his, by law, by registration, by the entry in the ledger. Tang Dynasty records document women petitioning to be released from the palace, asking permission to return to their families, to marry, to have some version of ordinary life. Most were denied. Some emperors periodically released large numbers of older palace women, not from compassion but from logistics. The palace was expensive to maintain. Too many women was an administrative burden, so sometimes they were released in batches, like excess inventory. Women who had entered the palace at 12, walking out at 40 into a world that had entirely moved on without them. No family who remembered them clearly. No husband, no children. no practical skills for life outside the palace, no language for what had been done to them, because the thing that had been done to them had no name that anyone in their world would recognize as a wrong. It was simply the system. For the women who were noticed, who did attract the emperor's attention, the danger did not decrease. It increased, because rising in the palace hierarchy meant becoming a target for every woman below you who wanted what you had, and every woman above you who wanted to ensure you stayed below them. Competition inside the imperial harem was documented in Tang, Ming, and Qing dynasty records with a consistency that tells you everything about what daily life felt like. Accusations, rumors, alliances formed and broken overnight. Women who had been closest friends reporting each other to the empress for real or invented infractions. Because the stakes were not comfort or status, the stakes were survival. A woman who fell from imperial favor could be demoted, reassigned to the coldest, most remote corner of the palace complex, given reduced food allowances, assigned the worst work, or in extreme cases, accused of practicing dark arts against the emperor. That accusation, which required no evidence to make and was almost impossible to disprove, carried a death sentence. Ming watched all of this from her position at the bottom of the hierarchy. She watched women she had arrived with rise and then fall faster than seemed possible. She watched the ones who played the game most ruthlessly survive longest. She watched the ones who formed genuine friendships pay for that trust when the friendship became a liability. And she understood, with the specific clarity that comes from watching something for years from a safe distance, that the palace was not a home for any of the women inside it. It was a competition with no exit door and no prize worth winning. Now I need to tell you about the most extraordinary woman who ever lived inside this system, because her story does not end the way this system was designed to end. Her name was Zetian. She entered the palace at 14 as a concubine of Emperor Taizong. When Taizong died in 649 AD, the law required that all concubines who had not produced children shave their heads and spend the rest of their lives as Buddhist nuns. Zetian was sent to a monastery. She was 26 years old. What happened next changed Chinese history. Emperor Gaozong, Taizong's son and successor, remembered Zetian from his father's court. He brought her back to the palace, made her a concubine of his own, and over the following years, through intelligence, strategy, and a complete willingness to use every tool the system made available, Zetian rose from concubine to empress consort. And when Gaozong's health declined, she governed beside him. And when he died in 683, she continued governing. Through two of her own sons as emperors, she deposed when they became inconvenient, until in 690 AD she declared herself emperor, not empress consort, not empress dowager, emperor. The only woman in Chinese history to rule as emperor in her own name. She ruled for 15 years, and she was ruthless by any standard. She destroyed enemies without hesitation. She built an intelligence network that reached into every corner of the court, but she also reformed the imperial examination system to allow men from non-aristocratic families to rise. She expanded the empire's borders. She commissioned some of the greatest Buddhist art the Tang dynasty produced. She was brilliant. She was dangerous. She was both at exactly the same time. And here is the thing that matters for Ming's story and every woman's story inside the system. Zetian succeeded by mastering every rule of the system from the inside and then using those rules to dismantle the ceiling they had built over her. She was the exception, the one woman in 2,000 years who found a way through. And the fact that she was the exception, the fact that her story is remarkable, precisely because it is singular, tells you everything about what the system was designed to do to every other woman inside it. History records the rise and fall of favorites. It does not record what daily life felt like for the thousands of women who never rose and never fell, who simply existed inside those walls for decades with no story worth recording. But archaeology does. Excavations around the sites of Tang Dynasty palace complexes have uncovered the personal objects of palace women: small bronze mirrors, bone hairpins, clay figurines that women made themselves, small figures, animals, shapes that had no practical purpose, just things made by hands that needed something to do, things made to fill the hours. Historians who study these objects note that the quantity of personal items found in the lower quarters of the palace compared to the upper quarters suggests something simple and devastating. The women with the least power made the most things with their hands, because making something, anything, was a way of saying to yourself that you still existed, that you were still a person, not just a registration in a ledger. Ming made things, small clay birds. She made them in the hours between her duties when no one was watching. She had made them since she was 12. By the time she was 30, she had made so many that she began giving them away to the other women around her. Not as gifts, as proof. We were here. We made something. We existed. The Imperial Concubine system formally ended with the collapse of the Qing dynasty in 1911. The last Imperial concubines were released from the Forbidden City in 1924, when the last Emperor Puyi was expelled from the palace complex entirely. Women who had entered the palace in the early 1900s as young girls, walking out as middle-aged women into a China that had completely transformed around them while they were inside those walls. The world they had been taken from no longer existed. The families who had presented them for selection were gone or scattered. They walked out carrying nothing that prepared them for what was outside, because the system, even in ending, had no provision for the women inside it. It selected them with ceremony. It discarded them with silence. And most of their names, the 12-year-old girls who arrived in autumn carriages from Henan and Shandong and Sichuan, were never written in any record that history thought worth keeping. We know Wu Zetian's name. We know the names of the favorites who rose high enough to be noticed by the historians who served the emperors. We do not know Ming's name, her real name, the one her mother was fixing her hair for on that last morning in the courtyard. We do not know it. 2,000 years, millions of women, most of them nameless, not because they were unimportant, because the system was designed by the people who benefited from it, and they decided whose names were worth remembering. Before you go, 2 questions. Question 1. The fathers who presented their daughters for palace selection, many of them genuinely believed they were giving their daughters a better life. Does good intention change what the outcome was? Or does the outcome speak louder than the intention? There is no comfortable answer. I want yours. Question 2. Wasn't is the only woman in Chinese history to rule as emperor in her own name. She got there by mastering a system designed to contain her and using it against itself. Does that make her a symbol of resistance or a symbol of how complete the system was? That even the one woman who broke through had to become the system to defeat it? Leave your answer below. I read every single one. If this story reached you, share it with one person who needs to hear it. Subscribe to Ancient Mindcast if you have not already.